The route from Weinheim to Bensheim in September is not a historic route, not a famous route you'll find in guidebooks, not a route people write poems about, not a route the great travelers take, the celebrities who fill the history books, but it has a scent, a fragrance, a breath that overcomes everything else, that makes you forget everything else, that makes everything else unimportant. And that's what makes it special, what makes it unforgettable, what makes it sacred in a quiet way. It's the scent of orchard meadows, of the meadows where fruit has grown for decades, where apples and pears fall, rot, return to the soil. When the fruit falls in this September, when everything becomes too ripe, when the time comes, when the light begins to turn, when the sweetness becomes overripe, overdue, overflowing, and begins to ferment, to transform into something else, something more complex, something stronger, something that belongs to nature, not to humans, who can't control it, who can't stop it. The train travels slowly through this part of the country, not because it must, not because of rules or schedules or time pressure, but because the way is winding, branched, full of small villages, full of history, full of life that's quiet, that isn't rushed. And because there's not much here that's urgent, that lives by hectic pace, that has to be fast, that tugs, that pushes. And I sit with my window open, just a bit, just enough that the air comes in, that the scent streams in, that the night touches me. And I breathe this September scent, this one scent, this one smell that can hold a whole life, that's almost a whole life. Apples, pears, the damp grass beneath them, the dew damp, carrying morning dew, collecting all night. The damp wood of the old trees, the wood moisture, containing time, containing decades, containing patience, containing love. There's no drama here. There's no story I could tell of a particular person, of a fate, of a turn, of a conflict, of a resolution. Because there's no particular person, no character with a name, no dialogue, no plot. There's only me, and the scent, and the feeling that this moment is complete, that this moment is enough, that this moment is everything, that more isn't necessary. Everything I need, everything a person needs to live, to exist, to be satisfied, sits in this moment, breathes in this moment, beats in this moment. The train is a feeling, is not just a means of transport, not just mechanical movement, is a feeling of movement and safety, of holding and traveling at once. The meadows are scent, are not just fields, not just nature, are memory made of fragrance, our history made of molecules, our past, present, and future made of breath. The night is still warm, surprisingly warm despite the late summer, despite hints of ending, of cold, of winter, of frost and snow coming. And everything smells of ending, but not frighteningly, not darkly, but peacefully, gently, naturally, rightly, like everything living smells when it ends, when it prepares for sleep, for return, for transformation, for new beginning in another form. I think of all the people living in this part of the world, in houses far from the track, 100 meters away, kilometers away, sitting in their houses, lying in their beds, living their lives, and yet still hearing the train when it passes, when it chugs and snorts on this route, when it cuts the air with its presence, with its sound. And I think, that's my train. That's my sound. That's my night. That's my scent. That's my moment. That's my life. And for them, it's normal, is every day, is something they no longer notice, that they've stopped hearing, that they've suppressed, that's part of the soundscape of their childhood, something they no longer consciously perceive. They've grown accustomed to it, adapted to it, accepted it as part of their reality, their normalcy. But for me who only passes through here, only on this one night, in this one September, in this one year, on this one route, on this one journey, for me, this is completely extraordinary, is a gift that never belonged to me, is a revelation, is almost grace, is blessing. The apples fall. I can hear them, distinctly, carefully, loud in my ears, louder almost than the train, than the wheels. The apples fall from the trees, fall from their time above to the time below, the gentle, barely audible landing on the damp earth, not loud, not dramatic, not violent, but rhythmic, regular, reliable, like a metronome, like a clock counting time, like a heart beating. Apple after apple, pear after pear. It's as though the trees are saying, in a voice older than words, now is the time. Now let it go. Now let loose. Now trust. And that's the only imperative here, the only truth, the only voice that speaks, that drowns out all other voices, that overcomes all other truth. September says, it's time to fall. It's time to let go. It's time to become something else, something new, something nature needs. And everything falls, everything lets go, everything trusts the process, the great process, the eternal process. Everything surrenders. I sit longer than I need to, keep the window open, though Bensheim approaches, though lights begin to appear, though the normal world knocks. I sit and breathe and let the scent penetrate me. Let it fill me. Let it become my flesh, become my blood. I think of the trees, of generations of trees that have stood here, that have given apples, that have given pears, year after year, century after century. I think of the people who picked these fruits, generation after generation, of the hands that picked them, of the hands that carried juice and sweetness, of the lips that tasted them, of the children who ate these fruits. And I sit here, in this train, in this night, and I'm part of this chain, part of this story, part of this continuity. I'm a witness. I'm a keeper of this memory. Bensheim approaches, comes visibly closer. The lights of the city begin to blink on the horizon. The platform becomes visible, becomes real. The window closes again, slowly. My hand pulls it shut, because the station nears, because the city nears, and with it civilization, lights, people, the normal world. But this scent still sits on my clothes, penetrates them, lives in the fibers, in my hair, between the strands, deep in my lungs, in the alveoli, in my blood almost. September sits now in me, is part of me, is my memory. And I'll carry it with me, carry it inside me, until I forget it. Or perhaps, hopefully, until I travel this route again. Until the next September comes. Until the apples fall again. Until everything repeats itself, new and old at once. And for now the meadows are dark, dark as the night itself, dark as a secret, and the apples grow softer, become matter, become humus, become earth again, become dust, become history. The night grows older and warmer still somehow, grows fuller, grows deeper, reaches for me, and my eyes, they grow so heavy, so tired, so blessed with tiredness. And the scent carries me away, carries me forth, away from this September, away from this moment, away from this reality, away from this night that's also a dream, that's also a memory, into a dream that also smells of apples, that also smells of pears, that also smells of earth, that also smells of ending, of transformation, of grace, that is so sweet, so overripe, so ready, so complete, so fulfilled. I met the man who counts stars on the journey from Rostock to Stralsund, on a train traveling over flat land across the Mecklenburg-Vorpommern plain, so flat like an open hand, so open that the sky, the great wide North German sky, commanded all the attention, left no distraction, no hills, no forests, just sky and earth. He sat beside me without me quite noticing it. That's how it sometimes is, the way people board, unnoticeably, silently, without you really seeing them, without your mind registering them, until suddenly you notice they're there, so alive beside you, so present, and you realize, with astonishment, that they've been there a long time, perhaps since the beginning of this journey, since Rostock maybe, since the first hour. His notebook was what I noticed first. Large, thick, old, very old, with a brown leather cover, the leather worn, handled, cared for, with pages slightly wavy, bent almost, as though the notebook carried too much knowledge, too much life, too much observation, too many nights, too many numbers, too many stars. "I count," he said, without waiting for my question, without me asking one. I hadn't asked anything, but he answered anyway, as though he'd given this speech 100 times, 1,000 times, as though the speech lived in him, as though it were his life. "I count the stars, every night, for exactly 44 years now. 44 years. Every night that's not cloudy, every night with clear sky, and there aren't so many clear nights here in the north. I count." I asked him, "How can you count stars? There are too many. Millions, billions perhaps, almost infinite." And he looked at me with old, wise eyes, pale blue, attentive, as though I'd misunderstood the simplest question, as though I were a child who couldn't grasp the logic. "You don't count all of them," he said patiently, with infinite patience, with the patience of 44 years of counting, 44 years of observation. "You choose a quadrant in the sky, always the same one, the same point you can see from where you live, and you count how many stars are in it on that evening, under those conditions, in that moonlight, at that temperature. And the next evening you count again, the same quadrant, the same place in the sky, as though comparing a picture. And you see whether there are more or fewer, whether something has changed, whether new stars are there or old stars have disappeared." He opened his notebook carefully, as though opening a sacred book, as though the pages were the Bible, with reverence, with respect. And it was full of numbers, full of observations, page after page, neatly arranged, carefully written, dates beside them, conditions noted, moon phase, temperature, visibility. 1959, I read. 12 stars. 14th September, clear. Moonrise 23:15. Temperature, mild. And then, 15th September, 10 stars. Moonlight, brightness, fewer stars because of the moon. And then, 16th September, 13 stars, very clear. Temperature, cold. Everything more distinct. Decades written down in fine script, in this clean, old hand, in this trembling, precise hand. 44 years of observations, of counting, of attention, of love of the night, of life. "What has changed?" I asked. "Light pollution," he said immediately, like a well-learned answer. "Lights from cities, more and more lights, bigger and bigger lights. And the atmosphere, not much, but a bit. And sometimes the eyes themselves change. I wear glasses now, strong glasses, and it's different to count with glasses than without. The colors are different, the sharpness is different. I have to account for that in my notes." He turned the notebook around, leafed back. "But you see, the stars haven't become fewer. That's what's interesting. What's interesting is that they haven't become fewer, even though everything speaks against it." "Why do you do this?" I asked, and it was a genuine question, a question out of genuine confusion, genuine curiosity. I didn't understand the craft, the patience, the years, the nights, the dedication. "Because," he said, and his voice became softer, older, as though speaking into the past. "Every night is different. Every night is new, though it's the same place in the sky, though I choose the same point. The stars never move, but the night is always different. The atmosphere is different. The quality of light is different. And I'm different. And when I count, I'm involved, I'm part of it. I'm entangled, I'm present. I'm not just a man who takes a train and has a house and pays bills and time mixes and passes. I'm a man who knows the stars. Those 10 or 14 or 15 stars in my quadrant, I know them all, personally, almost by name. Each has a personality. For 44 years I know them, I've observed them. And I know which ones are new stars I didn't see before, and which ones perhaps, well, not gone, not disappeared, but changed, brighter or darker, older or more weary. The train was now in flat land as far as the eye could see. There was no distraction, no hills, just earth and sky. And the sky opened above us like a giant hand, almost God's hand, almighty, infinite, vast. And in the hand were the stars, few because of the moonlight, because of the bright, glowing moon, but there were some, perhaps 10 or 15 in the place where I was looking, in my quadrant of ignorance, in my field of the unknown. "When we arrive in Stralsund," he said, and his eyes were already elsewhere, already on the stars, already at his task, "I will count, with my glasses, with my thick old notebook. And then I write it all down, everything. The number, the conditions, the temperature, the moon. And tomorrow night I'll count from a different place, from a different spot. Because I travel, you see. I'm constantly on the move. I go from city to city, from country to country, from place to place. And I count everywhere, everywhere I am. And that's interesting, very interesting. Because the stars change when you see them from different places. Because the atmosphere is different. Because the human is different. Because the soul is different." We sat in the dark and said not much more. Not much more. The man with his notebook was already counting, motionless, concentrated, absolutely still, almost in a trance. His fingers went over the page, noting, writing, whilst his eyes went to the sky, up, searching, finding, counting. 1, 2, 3. And I realized this wasn't madness. This wasn't obsession, wasn't a psychological disorder, wasn't neurosis. This was a way of living. This was a philosophy. This was a way of saying, I see the world. I really see it, every day, every night. I count it. I measure it. I observe it. So I am with it. So I am connected. So I'm not alone. So I count. And now, as we travel, as the train carries me on, and the night grows older, grows deeper, grows heavier, grows riper, and the stars become less visible, disappear behind clouds, behind moonlight, behind the horizon, behind time. I think of this man, of these 44 years of counting, of this routine that's not a routine, because every night is new, every night different, every night a surprise, every night a new adventure, a new chance. Of this way of living, with attention, with full presence, with patience, with a kind of spiritual love of the world, of the universe. My eyes grow heavy, grow tired, but I try still to count in this moment. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then the numbers disappear, become dream, and only the stars remain. Few, but there, shining, bright, faithful, constant, imperishable. And the night, dark and vast and endless and wonderful. And the gentle rhythm of the train that carries me, ta-dum, ta-dum, ta-dum. A heartbeat that calms me, that lulls me to sleep. A light in the window. Only that, only this one light, is the first thing I see as the train travels between Interlaken and Brienz, a route I've traveled 100 times, and now the 101st. In a night cold the way only alpine nights are cold, a cold that cuts into the bones, that freezes your breath, that turns the window into an ice border, a boundary between the warm compartment and the black, stone world outside. The window belongs to a house clinging to a slope, embedded in stone in the mountain, as though the mountain itself holds the house, protective, ancient arms of stone and history. The house could easily slip from the cliff into the darkness below, into the valley, into the abyss, into infinity. But it doesn't. It stays firm, unmoved, in its place, for decades perhaps, for a century perhaps, for more than a human lifetime. And the light stays too, burning in its window, steadfast, golden, waiting, living, breathing almost like a living organism, like a heart beating in the night. It's not blinking light, not neon, not the fast modern lights that hit your eye, blind you, confuse you, draw you into chaos. It's steady light, constant light, a light that doesn't flicker, doesn't pulse, doesn't want to play with you, doesn't try to buy your attention. Yellow, warm, comfortable light, born of an old bulb, a warm yellow that makes everything gentle. Not LED bright and robotic, not that artificial coldness sitting in modern rooms that exhausts you. It gives me immediately the thought that someone sits there, at night, alone, in this house on the mountain, at this height, in this cold, in this solitude, and perhaps reads, wears reading glasses on a nose that has also read for many decades, thousands of pages, many worlds, or waits for someone, for a return, for a call that never comes, for a letter that never arrives, or thinks about life, decisions, branches, paths not taken, journeys not made, or simply doesn't sleep, can't sleep, wakes every night like this moment. And that's simply how this person lives, with the light, in this stillness, in this acceptance. The train passes by, fast, relentless, rhythmic, and I see the window only for a few seconds, perhaps 10, perhaps 20, perhaps 25. But that's enough. That's completely enough. There was a woman in my childhood who had such a light, exactly like this. A light like this that marks itself on my retina now, in this moment, as the train passes by. She lived in a house up on a hill, not close to the village, but visible from everywhere. From school I could see it, small and golden, a point in the darkness, like an inland lighthouse. And every night when I looked out from my window, the light was on, always, reliably, like a constant in a life that was anything but constant. My grandmother said the woman couldn't sleep, that she had an illness, something nervous, something in the soul that wouldn't let her rest. She sat awake all night and looked out the window at the village, at the lights, at the people passing. But perhaps, I thought even then, when I was still small, perhaps that's not suffering. Not really. Perhaps that's how some people are with themselves at night. How some people don't fight their loneliness, but embrace it, like an old friend, like a familiar voice. How some people are alone with themselves, and not only endure it, but bless it. The light of the train is warm around me. The compartment is filled with this warm, seasonless warmth, from the heating sitting under steam, humming quietly. And outside it's dark, completely dark. Alpine air, cold pressing against the window. And somewhere up there, in this house on the slope, in this house on the stone, sits a person. I don't know if a woman or a man, if old or young, if sad or peaceful, if lonely or fulfilled in themselves, and perhaps watches this train passing by, this swift movement in their quiet night, this interruption in their eternity, and perhaps thinks, who sits in this train and looks up at my window? What does he see? What does he think of me? Am I lonely, or am I wise? And we don't meet. We don't really see each other. Not with these outer eyes. But for a moment, for a precious second, we're both awake at the same time. Both of us see a light in the night. Both pause. Both acknowledge that the other exists, that the world isn't empty, that there are other hearts beating too. Beating, beating, beating. Brienz comes closer. I feel it distinctly now. The wheels change their rhythm. The rattle becomes deeper, becomes different, becomes another song. And the train brakes slightly, loses speed, as though the mountain landscape itself wants to slow us down, hold us, not let us go. The mountains grow higher, bigger, narrower. Space shrinks, rock faces draw closer, and the light disappears behind a stone slope, is extinguished by rock, becomes memory, becomes longing. But it remains in my eyes, in my consciousness, carved like an inscription, an after-image that doesn't fade, a memento that stays alive, a gift I didn't ask permission for, but accept gratefully. It's possible, even likely, that I've passed this house before, 100 times, and never noticed. It's possible I saw it, but didn't perceive it. My eye looked through it like through glass. It's possible this is the first and only time I see that it's there, that a person sits there and stays awake, that the light breathes. And that's all right too, completely all right. Some things only need to be seen once to be complete, to do their work, to change the heart. I think of how many lights there are in this world, everywhere on this earth, in windows, in houses, in remote places, on mountains, in valleys, on flat plains, in cities of millions, and how each light is a story, a person, a heart still breathing, still awake, still hoping. And I'm only one person. The train travels only one route. I see only one window. But this one window connects me with all the other lights, with all the other people still not sleeping in this night, who are still awake, still thinking. We all sit in our rooms, at our windows, looking out or in, and we're connected through this moment, through this night, through this knowledge that we're not alone, not really alone. The train continues forward, faster now. Momentum builds. The rattle becomes steady. Ta-dum, ta-dum. And the mountains grow bigger, darker, almost frighteningly beautiful. A beauty that frightens you because it seems so endless, so relentless. And there are fewer and fewer visible lights, The civilized world falls away, falls back behind us, behind the mountains, behind the curves, into another time. And what remains is only darkness and form, rock and possible snow high on the peaks, cold and height. And somewhere, far away now, behind the mountains, behind the stone slopes, a light in a window that still burns, I'm quite sure, though I can see it no longer, though it's disappeared from my view. And that's enough for me. That's completely enough, more than enough. A light in the darkness is all I need to know that someone's still awake, that someone's still there, that I'm not alone in this world, that the world isn't empty of spirit and consciousness and love. And slowly, very slowly, my eyes grow dark, grow tired, become irresistibly heavy, filled with lead, filled with sleep. I met the midwife between Schwerin and Güstrow in the early hour when the night is still grey, dark grey, a grey like damp stone, and the world hasn't decided whether it wants to wake up, whether it's worth the effort, all the struggle, the costs, all the hopes that might be disappointed again. She sat with a bundle on her lap. Not a baby, no, not a new human life that emerged pink and crying into the world, but cleaning cloths, bandages, instruments, the tools of her trade, the instruments of her knowledge, the things she'd used in 1,000, 2,000 births, in 50 years of work, every day, every night. But her eyes were so far away, so distant from the present moment, so absent, that I immediately knew she'd just come from a birth, that she was still there somehow, with that woman, in that moment, in that room, in that struggle and that hope and that fear. "I'm coming from the village of Lübeck," she said, though I hadn't asked, as though giving a speech, a daily speech, a speech she'd already given 1,000 times and would give 1,000 times more. "A girl, 4 kilograms, 2 in the morning. A difficult birth, long hours, but the child is healthy, the mother lives. That's all that matters. The mother sits in her bed now. She'll sit in that bed for weeks, weeks of pain and healing, and watches the child, amazed, still amazed, perhaps weeping, weeping with gratitude, weeping with fear that she might damage it. And I'm on my way to the next, to Güstrow, an old woman in her 10th month, so well past her time, so already in danger, but still hoping. It's always like this. Here a baby, there a baby, babies everywhere. The world is full of babies, everywhere. And me in between, on this train, between the times, between the lives, blood still under my fingernails, though I've washed them 3 times, thoroughly, carefully, carefully. She was, how old? 70? 75? Perhaps older? 80? That was hard to say, because fatigue sat in her like something chronic, like a habit, something she'd carried for decades, that it had become part of her bones, part of her DNA almost, part of her soul. Her skin was wrinkled but firm. Her eyes were blue but deep, deep like old wells. "I've been doing this for 46 years, she said slowly, quietly, and it was pride and weariness at once. It was sorrow and grace at once. Since 1950 almost. Before the war, during the war, after the war, through everything. And you know what's strange? What's almost unbelievable is that births never grow old, never grow tired, never lose their power. The mothers change. They're younger now, some of them, younger than ever before. The times change, technology revolutionizes itself, the thoughts about birth and woman and child keep changing. But a birth itself, the moment of a birth, always stays new, always stays wonderful and terrible at once. Always. Every time is like the first time for me, even if not for the mother, who might have experienced it 5 times already. I asked her, or perhaps she asked herself. Perhaps she spoke to me like to a mirror. What's hardest after 46 years? After 50 years of work? And she answered quickly, as though she'd answered this question 100 times already, 1,000 times perhaps. Or perhaps never really aloud, but it was contained in the sentence, in her bones, in her voice, in her whole existence. The hardest thing is to hold the balance, the exact balance, between hope and caution, between joy and fear, between the joy of new life and the fear of failure, of death, of the unexpected. A birth is always both, always, not either or, but both at once. It's beautiful, wonderful, almost sacred, a moment where life emerges from life, where hope becomes reality, becomes a screaming, breathing, living child. And it's dangerous. Terribly dangerous, can give everything or take everything, can be joy or sorrow, can be life or death. And I have to hold both sides simultaneously at the same time, together, side by side, in my 2 old hands, in my tired head, in my full heart. She showed me her hands, small, practical, with short nails and scars everywhere. Scars from wounds, scars from work, scars from years, scars from life. These hands have helped 1,000 babies into the world, perhaps 2,000, perhaps more. I've never counted. Who counts? They look old, but they're still strong, very strong still. They look tired, but they're still ready. Always still ready, always open. And every time I sit there with a mother in her room, in her fear, in her space, and I think, if something goes wrong, if the baby doesn't breathe, if the heart doesn't beat, if the bleeding doesn't stop, these hands are responsible. These hands should have known, should have prevented it, should have been faster. That doesn't go away. Now, I feel that every time, every day, every night, in every room, with every mother. But then she told me about a child, 3 years ago, just 3 years ago, not long ago, still within reach of her memory, whose heart wasn't beating right, whose rhythm was wrong, whose life was already in question, already before birth, still in the darkness. And how she noticed, before the mother noticed, that something was wrong, before the mother felt the pain properly, understood it properly. And how this noticing, this inner knowing, this quick, right action saved the life, saved the child, saved the mother, saved a family. "I'm not God," she said, slowly, thoughtfully, as though she needed to assure herself. "I'm not even sure I read correctly what the bodies tell me, what these female bodies show me from within, what the babies' hearts tell me in the dark. I'm just an old woman with experience, with hands, with knowledge. But these 2,000 babies, they're awake. They're in the world. They're in schools, on streets, in beds, in the air, breathing, living, becoming. And that is, even though I don't believe God planned it like that, even though I'm not sure if there's a God or not, that is enough. That's more than enough for a life. That's all a life needs. Morning came slowly, not suddenly, but like a grace approaching, unobtrusively, quietly. The grey became lighter, became a soft pink, became a fine orange, became a soft yellow on the eastern side of the sky, where the sun rises, where the day begins, where life renews itself, every day, without question, without hesitation. And the midwife fell asleep at some point, without my noticing, without her announcing it. Simply, she was tired, deeper tired than words can say. Her head tilted slightly to the left, against the window, against the cold glass. The glass that shows the cold outside, but doesn't let it through. Her hands still in her lap, her old, working hands. The bundle with the instruments beside her, ready for the next journey, ready for the next mother, ready for the next life. But even in sleep, I could see that she was completely ready, absolutely ready, prepared, ready for the next birth, the next mother, the next fear, the next hope, the next victory, the next moment where life emerges from life, new, wonderful, dangerous, almost sacred. And she would be there, immediately, without thinking, with her old hands, with her quiet, knowing voice, with her half-century of experience, with her whole soul, with her whole love for birth, for life, for people. The train continues forward, rhythmically. Ta-dum, ta-dum. And the sun comes, slowly, growing bright. The world becomes bright and awake and alive again. But I still sit in the half-light of the compartment and think of all the babies, awake, breathing, crying, laughing, playing. Because this woman, this old woman, this midwife, was awake, was present, was ready. And somehow that comforts me deeply, very deeply, in a place where fear cannot enter. The world keeps going, not by machines, not by plans, not by technology, but by people, by old people who know their hands, who know their limits, who know their abilities deeply, and who are ready to use them. Every night, every hour, every birth. And I grow slowly tired again, so gently, so surely. Morning becomes a dream. The sun grows warm, and my eyes fall shut. Heavy, safe, loved. The sound of the wheels has a very special tone today. Not steady like usual, but a bit irregular, a slight arrhythmia, a stumble almost, a heart skip of the rails. And that immediately reminds me of an older gentleman I met on the route from Saarbrücken to Trier many years ago, perhaps 30 years ago, in a time when the world was still different. He sat with a ticket in his hand, older than some of my memories, from 1952, stamped, colorless from time, an artifact almost, a relic from another epoch, a testament to journeys he had taken, or a journey that was meaningful to him. "That was my first journey," he said, thoughtfully, as though remembering a love. "From here to here. But back then the world was still bigger, The distance was bigger, the time was bigger, the hope was bigger. He had been a railwayman, 50 years long, almost his whole life, an entire existence devoted. Not a driver, not a conductor, not on the train. He was the man who kept the rails in order, who maintained the track, who watched over the lifeblood of the system. The man who stood guard over all these connections, over thousands of kilometers, over the iron arteries of the nation, so they wouldn't someday collapse under the weight of millions of tons of steel and human will and time. "You see," he said, leaning closer, as though telling me a secret, "a track is like a body, like a human body, alive and mortal. You can't see it from the outside, not immediately, not at first glance. But if you know how to look, if you take the time for it, you can see whether it's growing old, whether it's growing weary, whether it's growing ill, whether it's beginning to suffer silently without complaint, whether it'll soon collapse, fall apart, can no longer hold." And he showed me his notebook, decades old, the pages dark from weather and work, almost dark brown from rain, from sun, from sweat. Full of notes, handwritten, years of observations. Crack at kilometer 47. Rust at the joint, gets worse with the years. Beam needs replacing, soon, before everything breaks. All handwritten, carefully, all the observations of a man who really looked, who saw the rails as alive, as breathing, as speaking. I asked him, slowly, carefully, what happened when he retired, when those 50 years finally ended. And he was silent for a long time, very long. The rattle of the wheels was the only sound. Then he said, quietly, "I went mad. The first year. That was the worst year of my life, more intense, heavier. I woke every morning and didn't know what to do, where to go, who I was without the rails. My hands didn't know what to do, were empty, useless, restless. Because for 50 years they knew exactly. We go to the track bed, we check, millimeter by millimeter. We repair, we maintain. That was the grammar of my life. And then, nothing. Silence. A silence that killed, almost, slowly. A bit more every day. But then, and it was strange that this was strange, that my body led me ahead of my mind, that instincts are older than reason. He began to travel. By train. Simply to travel, like a patient, like a passenger, not like a worker, not like a supervisor. Every week a new route, he told me. And it was longing and healing mixed in his voice, was hope and sorrow mixed, was pain and joy. I get on a train and travel somewhere, everywhere, without plan, without goal, simply travel. From Saarbrücken to Nuremberg, from Hanover to Stuttgart, from Munich to Hamburg, everywhere, everywhere. And as I sat and looked out the window, I realized that I still see the rails, will still see them forever. I could see where I'd worked in my life, where my hands had been, where my heart had been, where my tears had fallen. I could say, I laid a new rail here 30 years ago, after the war, when I was young and strong. And here, that was a difficult spot where I needed almost a week, sweating, bleeding almost, with pain in every muscle, to fix the joint, to heal the break, to keep the system alive. The rails are like autobiography, he said, and I heard in his words a deep truth, a realization that took a whole life to become. My autobiography is everywhere beneath us, everywhere on this continent. Every rail, every nail, every repair, every night under the moon, every hour under the sun. My hands are in them, live in them. When I travel over my own life, my own story, my own love, my own work. And that is more than I could ever have hoped for at the end of my life, in this new time of rest, when everything is still, when the hands can finally find peace, when memory becomes everything. I saw him sitting there, this old man with his scarred hands and his precious notebook, and I suddenly understood, absolutely, that he hadn't really grown old. No, that's not right. Time aged around him, wrapped itself around him like a coat, adjusted him. But he himself, his essence, his heart, is timeless, almost immortal, if such a thing can be said. He still sits in the track bed, still checks the rails with his eyes, with his knowledge, still repairs the break points, the weak spots. But now he does it with his whole body, with his whole life, with the train as his tool, the route as his notebook, his autobiography made of steel and time. And I understood that this is the highest form of circularity, the highest form of love, the highest form of fulfillment, when what you created ends up carrying you, holding you, embracing you, doesn't let you go, never lets you go. He fell asleep slowly, his head tilted to the side. The notebook lay on his lap, protective, important. And the train continued through the landscape of the Saarland, through a history, through a biography made of steel. And I sat and listened to the wheels. And yes, I could hear distinctly where the rails were older, where the scars were, where someone, perhaps he himself 30 years ago, had had to work, had had to suffer, had had to sacrifice. And it was as though the track itself spoke to me, in a language made of rhythm and tone, of vibrations and truth, and said with every rail, "A man stood here. He watched over this track. He made sure we could travel safely, that these wheels wouldn't jump the rails, that this journey wouldn't end in chaos and blood." Trier drew closer. The city cooled us a bit. The train began to slow. The rhythm changed, became narrower, became limited, became less free. And he woke up, slowly, gently. His eye opened. His old hand grasped the notebook, protective, loving. And he gathered his few things together, arranged them carefully, stood up slowly, pain visible in his knees and back, and left the train without fanfare, without goodbye, without a word, simply gone, back into his life on the rails. But I could see his notebook briefly, through a brief, important glance into his life, and in it was written, in finest ink, in handwriting that was a whole life, a handwriting vibrating with love, a life story written not in words, not in tales, not in sentences, but in numbers, in millimeters, in rust spots and new rails, in notes and dates, in an archive of care and love, of watchfulness and devotion. A life that sits beneath the feet of all travelers, everywhere, always, invisible, unforgotten, alive, waiting. And now I still sometimes travel this route, travel between Saarbrücken and Trier, travel over his life, travel over the work of his hands. And I try to hear what he heard, what he always heard. The voices of the rails, the story beneath me, the voices of all the men who built the rails, repaired them, loved them. My eyes grow heavy from this listening, from this trying, heavy as lead, heavy as love. The night grows deeper, grows older, grows more familiar, and I slowly sink into this autobiography made of steel and memory, made of sacrifice and love, made of hands that worked, slowly, becoming safer, until I myself become part of the rail, part of his story, part of this infinite network of work and time. I met the beekeeper on a train through Provence, on the way from Avignon to Manosque. The train passed through a landscape that looked like a painting. Lavender fields stretching as far as the eye could see, in this incredible violet that can't be described, only seen. Interspersed among them were pines, dark green and warm, and stone cottages with shutters in faded blue, and the sky, that Provençal sky that's so high and so clear you feel you could see to the end of the world. She was a woman of about 70, small and sturdy, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of honey, warm and golden and translucent. Her hands were strong, her nails cut short, and around her wrists she wore narrow bracelets of plaited leather. She smelled of lavender and something else, something sweet and warm that I didn't recognize at first. Later, I understood it was beeswax, the smell of an entire life spent among bees. We fell into conversation about the lavender glowing outside in the sun, and she told me about her bees. 50 hives, she said, on a hill above Valensole. 50 families, that's what I call them, because they are families, each with its own character, its own rhythm, its own personality. Some are gentle and calm. Some are wild and impatient. Some hum quietly to themselves, as though singing a song. And some are silent. The silent hives are the ones you have to watch. I asked her what a day looks like when you're a beekeeper, and she smiled, that golden smile, and said, "The day begins with humming. Before the sun rises, I go out to my hives, and I just stand there and listen. The hum of bees at dawn. That's the most beautiful sound in the world. It's not loud, not quiet. It's like the breathing of the earth, like the vibration of something very ancient and very alive. It goes through the ground, through your feet, through your whole body. You feel it more than you hear it." And then, she said, when the sun climbs higher and the air grows warm, they begin to fly out. Thousands of them, from every hive, like little golden specks dancing in the air. They fly to the lavender fields, to the rosemary bushes, to the thyme mats on the stony slopes. Each bee knows exactly where it's going. Each has its own route, its own flower, its own rhythm. They never get lost. They never doubt. They simply know. That's always fascinated me. This certainty, this absolute quiet knowing. She told me how you harvest honey. Not with haste, she said, and not with fear. With calmness, with respect. You approach the hive slowly. You move steadily. You breathe calmly. The bees feel everything. They feel your fear, your rush, your unease. If you're nervous, they get nervous. If you're calm, they're calm. It's like a mirror. They show you who you are in that moment. You can't lie to bees, she said. You can lie to yourself, but not to bees. And the honey, she said, the lavender honey from my hill. It's pale, almost white, and it tastes of summer and wind and the long, warm afternoons of Provence. It crystallizes slowly over weeks and becomes soft and creamy like butter. When I open a jar in December, when it's cold and the bees are sleeping, then the summer is there again, in a spoonful of honey. The whole summer, all the warmth, all the light. That's the miracle of honey. It preserves time. It preserves the summer for the winter. It preserves the light for the darkness. I asked her what the bees had taught her over all those years, and she thought for a while, gazing out the window at the lavender fields slowly disappearing in the evening sun. And then she said, "The bees know when it's time. That's their greatest wisdom. They know when it's time to fly out and when it's time to come home, when it's time to work and when it's time to rest, when it's time to grow and when it's time to swarm. They follow no calendar, no clock, no plan. They follow the rhythm of the world, the rhythm of the blossoms and the sun and the seasons. And they're never wrong. Never." "We humans," she said quietly, "we've forgotten that. We watch clocks and calendars and to-do lists. We rush and plan and organize. But the bees, they simply know. They sense when the lavender will bloom before it blooms. They sense when the rain is coming before the clouds appear. They sense when winter's approaching and gather exactly as much honey as they need. Not more, not less. Exactly right. Always exactly right." She got off at a little station whose name sounded like a poem, took her bag, and went into the evening sun, into the golden light of Provence. And I imagined her walking up the hill to her 50 families waiting for her, humming, warm, patient, the way they always wait. The bees know when it's time. I think of that when I'm impatient, when I'm trying to force something that's not yet ready, when I'm rushing when I should be walking. Then I hear, in my memory, the humming, that deep, warm humming that goes through the ground and through the feet and through your whole body. The train carries on, and I sink deeper into the cushions. The rattle's like humming now, quiet and warm and steady, like 50 hives on a hill in Provence, like the breathing of the earth. My eyes grow heavy, and I let myself hum and be carried into the silence, into the warm, golden silence. I met the Danube Fisherman on a train on the route from Passau to Deggendorf in summer, when the heat still hung everywhere like a damp cloth, and even the distant mountains began to melt. The air in the compartment was heavy and warm, and it smelled of river, of green water, of mud, of all the things that live and die in the water. He sat across from me, a large, broad man with arms like tree branches, brown from the sun, with sinews visible under the skin like the structure of a tree. His hands weren't hardened like some craftsmen's, but smooth, almost delicate, polished by all the years in the water, shaped by the river's gentleness, not its force. He wore an old cap, gray and faded, not from age alone, but from constant contact with sun, rain, and the salty mist of the river. The cloth was soft, like cloth washed 100 times. Under the brim, a pair of green eyes looked at me, green like the water itself. The eyes of someone who gazes longer into the depths than into the sky, who knows the secrets beneath the water better than the cloud pictures above, who thinks with the river instead of with the land. I asked him how long he'd been fishing on the Danube, whether his whole life was this one river. He laughed quietly, not loud laughter, but one that sounded like water flowing gently. The laughter of a man who is satisfied, who knows exactly who he is. 34 years, since I was 16, he said slowly, deliberately, as though weighing every word like a fish. My father taught me, not from books or instruction, but by putting the net in my hand and showing me where to look, not where to look, but how. And his father taught him, and his father before him. 3 generations of Danube men, perhaps 4, perhaps 5, who think like the river, who breathe like the river, who dream of the river, who have become river. They've lived so much in the water. We've been fishermen as long as the Danube flows, and the Danube has flowed since the world was young, since time itself was young. The train swayed slightly round a curve, a gentle roll, almost a waltz step, and from our window I saw the river, blue-green and golden in the sunlight, majestic, slow, endless, vast like a quiet thought, like God's thought if God grew silent. You see, he said, and pointed with one hand to the river, the other resting on his lap like a dove, delicate, quiet. That's my office. That's my home. Not like your home, fixed, secure, always the same everywhere, stiff as stone, dead as stone. My home moves constantly. It changes with every minute, with every light, with every temperature, with every breath. In spring it's wild and fast, almost angry, when the snow in the mountains melts and roars down like an animal that's been caged long. In summer, warm and lazy, slow, sluggish, ready to sleep, like a cat in the sun. In autumn, restless, nervous, turbulent, as though it knows winter's coming, that cold's coming, that life must hide. In winter, most fishermen sleep. We sit in our huts and repair nets, net after net, all winter, and remember the fish, their faces, their ways, the time when they still lived before we caught them. He told me about his life on the water, how you read fish like a language, how you understand their ways, their desires, their fears, when they weaken and when they're hungry, when they flee and when they're still, when the heat of the day drives them deeper, when evening brings them back to food. Not like in a textbook, which has dead words, stiff illustrations, lifeless rules, but like someone who's concentrated their whole life on this one thing, who studied their thinking like a scholar studies his favorite books, which he's read 100 times and always, always finds something new, deeper meanings, hidden patterns. His voice grew slower, deeper, older. A fish, he said, and his gaze grew even more distant, even older, even deeper, is not stupid. He is just different. He thinks differently than you. Different, not less. You think about tomorrow, about food, about people, about money, about all the things that plague you, that distract you, that tear you apart. The fish only thinks about current, about shadow, about food, about danger, about the next moment, the next breath, the next life. That's all. His whole universe capsulated in these simple thoughts. But in this, that's all, lives a whole life, a whole universe, as complex as your universe, as rich, so full of meaning, so full of wisdom that you'll never understand, that you can only respect. I watched his eyes wander to the window, slowly, deliberately, to the river that flowed beside us like a green snake, endless, patient, unshakable, unstoppable in its flowing. The river that had flowed for millions of years, that would flow for millions more years, whether we fishermen were there or not, whether the boat was there or not. "This river," he said very quietly, so quietly I had to lean forward to hear him, to understand this voice that sounded like the water itself. "It taught me everything, not just fishing. That was only the craft, the tool, the language. Patience, the patience of water that polishes stones, not through force, not through anger, but through time, through 1,000 years of time, through gentleness, through continuity. Respect, deep respect for a force greater than your small force, your human force, which is really just such a small thing in this big world. How to wait without growing impatient. How to sit in a boat for hours, for days, for years, and simply wait, 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 and not think that time is wasted, but that time is invested in understanding, in dialogue, in quiet communication with something greater. How to take without taking. How to take the fish with a feeling of gratitude, not victory, not triumph, but with gratitude, with awareness that I take because this river gives to me. The Danube gives me the fish, and I give the Danube. What do I give her? 34 years of attention, 34 years of gratitude, 34 years of love. I'd like to say, but the word is too big, too common, too small. It's not much what I give, but it's honest, it's true. It comes from the heart. The train accelerated slowly, a gentle increase in speed, and I watched how the river fell behind us, still visible, still golden in the light, but growing smaller, growing more distant, like a memory fading. The water reflected the sun, reflected everything it touched, everything that flowed over it. The window showed me his reflection, or perhaps it wasn't a reflection anymore, but the man himself, already gone, already with his fish, already in the river, where his real life happened, his true life, his only life, where he felt more at home than anywhere else in the world, than in any house, than with any family, than in any city. "I'm getting off at Deggendorf," he said, and stood very slowly, carefully, deliberately, as though the train were working against him, as though time wanted to hold his limbs, as though the train wasn't ready to let him go. "My boat waits there, in the same place where it always waits, where it faithfully waits, impatient, ready, yearning for me. Tomorrow, early, before the sun rises, before the world wakes, I'll go out, and the river will close over me again, like a roof, like an embrace, like hands holding each other, gently, firmly, comfortingly. And I'll be back in my element, in my home, in my truth." The train fell back into the rhythm of the night. Ta-dum, ta-dum, ta-dum. Slow, sure, regular as a heartbeat. And outside, the Danube flowed, endless, tireless, unstoppable, like a force older than the world, like it has always flowed since time began, and will flow long after I'm dead, long after this man is dead, long after all the trains are gone. I thought of this man who had sunk his whole soul into a river, not as a prison, not as a compulsion, not as fate, but as home, his real home, his only home. And how wise that was, how wise and wonderful and sad and true. And how he'd understood what many people don't understand in their whole lives, even if they lived 100 years. That work isn't something you do out of necessity or for money or out of duty, but something you become, an identity, something that grows to your name like ivy on a wall, an identity inseparable from your name, your heart, your soul. And slowly, slowly, with the rhythm of the train, with the warmth of the summer night pressing through the windows, warm and sweet and heavy. My eyes grew heavy, heavy as lead, heavy as sleep itself. And I still saw the Danube, even as I no longer saw it, green and golden and flowing and endless, and how it carried me like a thought that carries me into sleep, that carries me home. On the line from Kassel to Marburg, just after midnight, when the world beyond the train window turned black and formless. Black as velvet, black as silk, black as sleep itself. There sat across from me an older woman. She was tall, but not upright. Rather, she was settled into herself like a tree that the wind has bent. Her hair was white as snow, not the yellowed white that old hair sometimes turns, but pure white, crystalline white, carefully plaited into a knot, not from vanity, not from pride, but from order, from the need for structure that old women sometimes have when life has grown wild and they need something firm, something they can hold on to, something that stays arranged. On her lap lay an old radio, solid, green, the sort of green that came from the 1950s, with proper buttons from a time when things still had weight, still meant something, when you could reach out and touch them rather than just rushing screens, when you had a conversation with objects instead of a monologue to them. The surface was scratched, worn smooth, loved so deeply that the scratches looked like marks of affection, proof of devotion. The radio was playing softly, so softly that I thought at first it was just my imagination, only a hum, only the nerves of a night train passenger who's been awake too long, whose ears have grown too sensitive. Then I recognized the voice, a late-night program, some local station, a man with a gentle, warm voice, the sort of voice that sounds old, that's heard a great deal, reading poetry. Old poetry, German classics, the sort you only read when the whole world is sleeping. Hölderlin, Trockel, the voices of the dead, read aloud by an old man's voice for other old people. She turned the volume down a touch further, thoughtful, concentrated, so that the words were barely understandable, barely audible to anyone but her, only the music beneath to be heard, a sort of humming, a kind of whisper. "Forgive me," she said, without looking up, without meeting my eye directly, though I was sitting right across from her. "I don't like it when it's too loud. The volume, you see, it's too much, too obtrusive, too sharp. But when it's too quiet..." And here she paused, a long pause. "Then I'm alone, completely alone. The train carries me, but I'm alone. And I don't like that anymore, not since, well, not anymore." Her gaze was far away, somewhere in the past, in a place I couldn't see. I asked her, gently, slowly, respectfully, how long she'd been traveling with the radio, whether it was a daily ritual, whether it was something she always did. She smiled, a quiet smile, not happy, but not quite sad either. The smile of someone remembering something painful, and yet treasuring it because the pain means it was real, that it was truly love. "Since my husband died," she said slowly. "That was 9 years ago. 9 years, 3 months, and 17 days. But who keeps count, eh? I do. I count every day, even when I don't want to, even when I try not to." She looked out the window into the black night, where nothing was visible but black. "We did everything together, watching television, listening to the radio, reading, everything as one. We never kept things separate. The radio sat in the front room, an old thing, older than this one, older than we were, a thing that lasts longer than people. And when he was in the kitchen, cleaning vegetables or making tea, I'd hear the radio from there. The sound would come through to me. When I was in the kitchen, he'd hear the radio from here, from this side of the house. We didn't need to speak. We'd said everything there was to say in 45 years together. 45 years of love and routine and daily life. But we heard each other through the radio's words, through the music, through the broadcasters' voices. It was a way of being together, a way of being close without looking at one another, a way of loving without speaking. She opened a small plastic bag beside her, carefully, lovingly, as if opening something sacred, and showed me what was inside. It was full of tiny rolled pieces of paper, hundreds of them, perhaps thousands. I couldn't count. The sum was too great. "Numbers," she said quietly. "Every night when the program finishes, I write down the number of the broadcast I've listened to, the exact time, 3 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock, the title, the broadcaster's name if I can find it. I write that down too. Sometimes a word that's particularly pleased me, a beautiful word, a word that's touched my heart, a sentence, a whole sentence that's moved me, that's brought tears to my eyes, quietly here in the compartment so no one could see. So, as if I had someone to share it with, someone I could say to, 'Did you hear that? This sentence?' The numbers are like a notebook kept between two people who can't speak to each other anymore, who can't speak. One of them can't speak anymore, but live together. Living together in this strange way that's left when one of you is gone, when one of you has left the world, but the other stays and still needs conversation, still needs communication, still needs the feeling of not being alone." Her fingers were delicate, almost translucent, almost sacred, as she tucked the papers back into the bag, as if she were handling relics, sacred objects, as if she were closing a coffin. 99 broadcast numbers now. I keep count precisely. Every piece of paper, every night, every broadcast, the number grows. Soon it will be 100. 100 is a lovely number. Then I'll exchange this lot for a new book, a new notebook for new numbers, and then we start again from 1, or rather, he and I start again. Like a new marriage, a new chapter. I said nothing for a long time. Minutes passed. The radio played on, softly, steadily, like a heartbeat. The man on the radio, this invisible man, continued reading his poem, unaware, not knowing that he was part of this quiet, loving ritual, that he was a means to an end, that a widow on a night train heard him on the route from Kassel to Marburg, in the depths of the night, and in doing so remembered her dead husband, that she had his face in her mind's eye, that she heard his voice, not the radio broadcaster's voice, but her husband's voice, lurking beneath the broadcaster's voice, like a memory that's always present. "Some people think it mad," the widow said suddenly, her gaze sharp, direct, fixed on me, as if she needed to justify herself, as if she had to defend her truth. "My daughter, she's 60 herself by now, I'd say. She tells me I ought to find a friend my own age, someone to talk to, someone to take walks with around town, to run errands with. But they don't understand, young people don't really. People in their rush, in their hunger for what's new, in their contempt for what's old. I talk far too much. I've always talked too much, told too many stories, asked too many questions. My husband was a quiet man, a listener, someone who heard before he spoke. The radio listens too. It hears me. It doesn't ask for answers, it doesn't demand, it doesn't suggest, it doesn't judge. It simply gives. It just gives, and I receive. I take in the voices, I take in the poetry. It's a dialogue without words, a dialogue of silence, speaking to silence. And that's all I can manage now, all I still need, all that still keeps me alive. The train fell quiet, rolling gently through the night, the wheels rattling on the track. But the train itself was still, gentle, peaceful, and only the radio spoke, whispering now, barely audible, barely loud enough to break the silence. The widow listened, completely absorbed, her whole being concentrated on the voices from the radio, on the poetry, on the dead words speaking alive. I watched her as she listened, how her face changed, how her lips moved as if she were reading, as if she were tasting the words, as if she were speaking with her dead husband through the words. through the mediation of the radio, the man's voice on the radio, and how her face grew peaceful, relaxed, how all the wrinkles, all the lines, all those marks of pain and time grew soft. That was enough. That was more than enough for one night. The rhythm of the train, clack, 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 was like an enormous heart carrying us all. The widow, the radio, her husband, who was far away and yet so present in the air, in the music, in the words. My own sorrow that I hadn't yet named, that I carried into this train. All of us together, all of us alone, all of us bound together in the night through memory and radio and love that doesn't die. And as my own eyes grew heavy, heavy as lead, heavy as sleep itself, I could still hear the gentle old voice of the broadcaster, Holderlin now, the final lines. Over all the mountain peaks, peace. And I understood that sometimes love isn't about speaking, isn't about being together, but about listening. Listening to how someone lives, even when they're no longer here. And this listening is a kind of love, a kind of presence, a kind that never ends, that has no conclusion, that only grows deeper with time. I met the Pigeon Breeder on the line from Duisburg to Dinslaken, on a March afternoon when the sky was still gray from the night's rain, a gray that hung heavy, that pulled at the earth like a weight, and the cold wasn't quite ready to let go of the ground, wasn't quite ready to allow the spring. The air in the carriage was cold and damp, with a hint of rain from outside. He stood for a long time in the doorway as he boarded, a very long time, unusually long, as if he had to take his time deciding whether this train was worthy of his presence, his burdens, his precious responsibilities, his sacred trust. He was small, perhaps 5'5", perhaps less, perhaps age had compressed him, with hair that was gray and white mixed together like old feathers, like the plumage of a bird that had stayed out in the sun too long, that had flown too long, whose feathers were worn thin by movement and time. And in his hands, delicate, almost translucent, like bird bones, like the bones you find in nature, white and thin and sacred, he held a cage, small but beautifully made from dark wood, warm brown like an old church, with carefully carved ornaments, skillfully done, lovingly. Ornaments that showed time, showed love, showed years. He sat down beside me, carefully, considerately, as if each movement mattered, and placed the cage gently on his lap, tenderly, lovingly, the way you hold a baby, the way you hold something sacred, the way you hold trust. The cage was warm. I could feel that from where I sat. Inside it sat a pigeon, gray, not white, not black, but gray like the sky after rain, with a ring around its neck in iridescent blue and green, like a tiny band of rainbow, like light breaking through feathers, like something that glows even when no light strikes it. "This is Mathilde," he said, and his voice became immediately softer, older, more tender, a voice that transformed, that grew younger, that had a heart. "My eldest, 16 years old. For pigeons, that's a very great age, truly unusual, truly rare. Some say pigeons reach 8, 9 years old if you're lucky, but Mathilde is special. Mathilde is not of this world, you might say." His gaze rested on the bird with a kind of reverence, a kind of sacred regard, the way you look at something ancient, something imperishable. "I've been breeding pigeons for 50 years, my whole life, really, my whole adult life. My father taught me when I was a boy, only 10 years old. He showed me the pigeons, showed me how to love them, how to understand them. And sometimes, when I can't sleep, in those long nights when you're old, when sleep won't come, I still hear him whistling his little melodies, hear him whistle. That was his signal for calling. That was how he'd bring the pigeons in when they came back from flight, from their adventures in the air, from their freedom." I asked gently why he was carrying this particular pigeon with him, why he hadn't left her in his loft at home, somewhere safe. His gaze grew even softer, as if the light changed, as if the sun sank lower, even further away, even older. "Mathilde was always the fastest," he said slowly, thoughtfully. And it was as if he weren't speaking to me at all, but to the pigeon, as if he were speaking with the bird, or to the past, or to something that hung beyond the window, that floated in the air below, that was everywhere. By the time she was 3, she was already a legend among my birds, the best, the fastest, the most faithful. She could fly, and she was gone, away from my hands, away from my world, away into the vast, infinite air, into the blue, into the distance. And I thought she wouldn't come back, that freedom was stronger than love, that she would choose not to return. But always, always she came back, every time. 158 times she flew away. I kept count, every single time. I kept a journal. 158 times she came back, to me, into my hands, home. Not once did she fail, no promise broken, only return, constancy, love, faithfulness, not conditional, not forced. But now she's old, so old, too old to fly. Her wings are still strong. I can see that when I hold her. When I feel the feathers, the muscles are still there, still vigorous. But her heart grows weary, grows wearier with each year. The train and its gentle swaying, it's almost like flying, but safer, more protected, gentler. So I bring her on the journey, a final journey, one last movement before it becomes too much. She shouldn't die alone in my loft, among all the young birds, the new pigeons who can still fly, who can still stretch their wings. She should see, should be reminded, that there's still a world out there, that there's still life beyond my room, beyond my hands, beyond the loft. I watched him regarding the pigeon, not merely looking at it, but regarding it with his whole being, and it was as if he weren't looking at just a bird, but at an entire life, an entire universe of sorrow and joy, of flight and return, of faithfulness and longing. His eyes were wet, not with tears, but with moisture, as if something in him were melting. "Do you know what I've learned from all these pigeons?" he asked me suddenly, but he didn't expect an answer. No, he didn't need one. The question was for himself, a rhetorical question. A question cast into space, into the night, into the train, into eternity. He was speaking to himself, to his bird, to you, Mathilde, to the past, to his father, to all the pigeons he'd ever bred. Faithfulness. Faithfulness, not as people understand it, not some stubborn, grim, dutiful thing, not because you must or because there are rules, not from habit or laziness, but a sweet faithfulness, a faithfulness born of love, pure, clean, untainted, from the desire to return, from the longing to come home. The pigeon could stay away if it wanted. It could choose, truly choose, to live a wild life, a free life, with no cage, without me, without this small person, this old person who calls them home with whistled melodies. But every evening, when the sun sets, and that's when the pigeons most want to fly, when the light is still beautiful, when the air is still warm, it remembers. There is someone waiting. There is a home, a place, a safe place where it is welcomed, unconditionally welcomed, no matter how tired it is, how much its wings ache, how old it has become. There is someone, me, who knows its voice, who recognizes its return before it even lands. I know not how, but I recognize it by the wing beat, by the sound of the wings. And it comes back. Always it comes back. Not because it's trapped. No, no. The loft isn't a prison. It's a home. Because it loves. And that is the greatest wonder I've ever learned. The train picked up speed a little. Slowly, gently, a gradual increase in pace. And I watched the Ruhr Valley landscape slip past like a film. Factories, gray and mighty. Tracks, countless tracks. Industrial architecture, not beautiful but honest. A gray poetry made of steel and stone and labor. people at work, building the world, making things. But in my thoughts, there were only the pigeons, always coming back, always returning home, like the seasons, spring, summer, autumn, winter, like the heartbeat. Clack, 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 clack. Like everything that's sacred, that comes again, that stays. "My daughter," the pigeon breeder said suddenly, his voice even sadder now, even older. "She doesn't understand, can't understand, why I still breed pigeons, why I give my whole life to the birds. She says they're not modern, not practical, not profitable. What do those words mean to me? She tells me I should retire, should rest, should stay at home, should come to her and her children, my grandchildren, whom I barely know, who barely know me. But how can I do that to my birds? They depend on me, not emotionally, not the way people are emotional. Pigeons aren't emotional in that way, but practically, existentially. They need food, everyday food, not just any food, but the right food. Water, always fresh water, a clean place to sleep, to rest, to live." He stroked the pigeon once more, tenderly, lovingly, like a farewell, like a parting kiss. "My grandchildren, they won't inherit my pigeons, no, nobody will. When I'm gone, when I've passed, they'll be gone too. They'll scatter, they'll fly off somewhere where people aren't, where they're free, where they can live like wild pigeons, without a cage, without counting, without purpose. That's sad, yes, it's sad for me, but it's also right. It's the way it should be. It's grace." The pigeon stirred, very slightly, very gently, the slightest flutter. And the man ran his hand over its feathers, not stroking, not playing, but acknowledging, the way you greet a friend you haven't seen in ages, whom you recognize, whom you tell, "You're still here, you're still living, I know you." Like a memory you touch, that you hold, that you preserve against forgetting. The train rolled on, clack, 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 steady, sure, inexorable. And the March air pressed against the window, cold, fresh, full of possibility, and the sky was still gray, March gray, the gray of transition. But now I could see the first green shoots, the first signs that spring was coming, that life was ready to come again, that the world was waking. And I thought of return, of how important it is to return, how sacred return is, of homesickness, of the longing for home, of the sweet, bittersweet knowledge that someone is waiting for you, that someone loves you, no matter how long you've been away, no matter how tired your wings are, no matter how old you become. And my eyes grew heavy, heavy as old feathers, heavy as love, heavy as memory. And I was almost a pigeon myself, flying in a distant landscape, in a blue world, hovering, free and yet safe, with only one thought, one that repeated itself. Come home, come home, come home. Until sleep, until peace. On a train from Milan to Como, early one summer morning, when the air was already warm, not pleasantly warm, but southern warm, the kind that comes from lands where the sun doesn't negotiate, and smelled of southern things, strong things, of warm old stone, of citrus, of life that breathes faster, that speaks louder, that burns. I met a young girl. She might have been 10, perhaps 13, that impossible age when children aren't quite adults and yet aren't quite children anymore, if you understand what I mean. If you've ever been young, if you still remember that crossing. Between innocence and knowledge, between play and seriousness. She wore a white dress, snow-white linen, far too fine for a train journey, far too elegant, far too carefully chosen, as if she were dressed for a great celebration when all she was doing was traveling, only going from Milan to Como, a short journey, unremarkable. And yet for this girl it was clearly important, manifestly important. And on her table sat a small tortoise, no bigger than a fist, compact, absorbed in itself, with a shell smooth and brown like polished wood, like something that might be 1,000 years old, that could be 1,000 years old, that could survive 1,000 years. I asked her, carefully, respectfully, about the tortoise, about this strange, curious, precious companion on a train journey. She looked at me, really looked, with her full gaze, and her eyes were large and serious. The eyes of an old person in a young body, not the eyes of a child at play, but the eyes of someone who has observed for a long time, who already understands much, who knows more than a child ought to know, who is old on the inside. "This is Stella," she said very quietly. Quieter than children usually are, quieter, older, more thoughtful. "She's old, older than me, much older. Older than my grandmother. She's lived longer than my grandmother lived. My grandfather got her long before I was born. I've known Stella my whole life, or Stella was already there, already part of the family. He had her for nearly 40 years. 40 years of love, 40 years of responsibility, 40 years of daily food, daily water, daily this quiet presence. And now I'm getting her, because the family says grandfather will die soon. They want Stella to have a new family, someone who loves her, truly loves her, not just feeds her. Someone ready to understand her, someone who has the time, tortoise time, the slowness, the understanding. She stroked the tortoise very lightly, barely visible, barely a movement, just one finger over the shell, not forcefully or strongly, not grasping, not clutching, but as light as a breath, like a feather, like light, as if she were weighing the trust, the weight of this touch, the sacredness of this moment. My grandmother says a tortoise is a keeper of time. Yes, literally, that's what she told me. She sees days come, and days become weeks, and weeks become years, and years become a life, a whole life, just observing, just being, just existing. Stella has become so old, has lived so long, because she's never in a hurry, because she doesn't have this guilt-driven rush, this modern sickness that torments people, that tears them apart. She lives in this other time, tortoise time, where each moment is exactly as it should be, not faster, not slower, not shorter, not longer, not past, not yet to come, but simply now. Where patience isn't a virtue, isn't something you practice, but a breath, a heartbeat, a way of being. The girl stared out the window, lost in thought, towards the Alps, which were blue in the distance, like a dream, like a promise of something vast, something eternal, something old and immovable that will always be there, long after we're all gone. My grandfather was like the train, she said softly, thoughtfully, with a sadness that wasn't her sadness, but the sadness of the world, the sadness of aging, of dying. Fast, always on the go, everywhere. Always something to do, something to build, something to change, something to improve, something to make. His heart was fast, his hands were fast, his mind was fast. But the tortoise, Stella, she teaches you to be different. She doesn't teach it actively, not consciously, but simply through her being, through her presence. She teaches you that there are other ways to live, other paths, other rhythms, other purposes. Not better and not worse. The problem with my grandfather was he always thought his way was better. Just different. A different rhythm. Ta-dam, ta-dam. Slow, not fast. A different tempo. The tortoise's beat, not the human beat. A different understanding of what matters. Not how much you do, but how you do it. Not how fast, but how deeply. The train wound through the Italian landscape like an animal that knows the way, that has traveled this route 1,000 times. Villas with flowers, fiery red blooms, rose-pink flowers, church spires, old and sacred, towers pointing up to God, lakes lying like mirrors reflecting the Alps, everything doubled, everything mirrored. When grandfather dies, the girl said suddenly, and her voice grew even quieter, even more serious, even older, an old voice in a young body, a voice that knows too much. I'll be alone with Stella, and that's good. That's not sad. Or it is sad, but it's also right, also possible, also acceptable. Sometimes people aren't enough. You need something quiet, something that doesn't speak, which I do too much of, that doesn't expect anything, that doesn't demand answers, that doesn't cling to you desperately with words and questions and love that's too heavy. Something that simply sits beside you, the way Stella sits beside me now, here on this table, still, silent, present. The way Stella sat beside my grandfather for 40 years. And that's enough. That's quite enough. That's already a kind of love, a different kind than human love. No words, no feelings, no expectations, but not less real, not less important, not less sacred, not less true. I regarded the girl and the tortoise, truly regarded them, not merely saw, but understood with my whole body, my whole soul. And it was as if I were seeing two old souls in the young body and an old, ancient shell. Perhaps the girl was already old, old inside, wise with age, an old spirit in the young face. Perhaps the tortoise had always been small, small from the start, and had stayed small, not from lack, but from choice, from wisdom. The train moved onwards, through Italy, through the summer heat, through the mountains. The girl opened a small white cloth, carefully, lovingly, and showed me salad. Not just any salad, but tiny, tender leaves, green as hope, and a few small strawberries, red and sweet and precious, which she'd carefully brought along for the tortoise, carried, guarded, protected on the journey. I give her the same food every day, she said, as if this were a sacred task, a task that mustn't be forgotten. She loves it. Order, continuity, repetition. Change frightens her, deeply frightens her, existentially frightens her. The unknown, the new, the unpredictable, that drives all tortoises mad, throws them off balance, out of their safety. But if you show her that tomorrow will be exactly like today, that the food will be exactly the same, that your face will be exactly the same, that the world is stable, then she grows calm. Then she can sleep. Then she can trust that the world isn't chaos, that things don't change, that she's safe, that I'm here, that love is reliable. As the train drew near Como, we were almost there, the journey nearly done. The girl grew quieter, even more still than before, like an ice statue, like something preparing itself. She lifted the tortoise very gently, with both hands, carefully, the way you hold a sacred wafer, and pressed her against her chest, against her white linen dress. Not the gesture of a child playing with a pet and delighted, not that, but the gesture of an old man carrying a precious burden, carrying great responsibility, who understands deeply, completely, that some things are sacred, that some moments are unforgettable, that some kinds of love grant immortality. I watched as she closed her eyes, slowly, thoughtfully, sacredly, as if saying goodbye to her grandfather, as if shortening the whole story, the whole passing on, the whole love in one embrace, concluding it, completing it. The train fell into its rhythm, clack, 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 and the Alps moved outside the window, unmoved, eternal, unchanging, and the lakes reflected the sun back up to the sky, and the summer was everywhere, unasked for, unearned, given like grace. And I thought of time, the time the tortoise has, generations of time, of patience, of understanding, of the sweet, eternal slowness of the tortoise that outlives grandfathers, that outlives people, that outlives generations, that outlives everything humans invent, everything humans love, everything humans lose. And the girl, this wise girl, learning that love doesn't mean hurrying, that life doesn't mean noise, that presence doesn't mean movement, that duration is a blessing, a healing, a grace. And my eyes grew heavy, heavy as time itself, heavy as a life fully lived, heavy as a sleep so deep as the earth that carries the tortoise, so deep as the time the tortoise carries within itself. on the line from Fulda to Bad Hersfeld, on a spring day, one of those days when the world is ready to wake, when the buds were just beginning to break, red and green, full of potential, full of promise, and the world was stirring from its long sleep, stretching, feeling spring coming alive. There sat across from me an old man with a book in his hand. Not just any book, not a modern newspaper or a paperback for the train journey, but a battered, worn, beloved Bible. So old that the pages were yellowed like old teeth, like ivory, like something that had long lain beneath the earth, seen light, been handled thousands of times. He was tall. Perhaps he had once been taller, before age compressed him, but bent now like a tree that no longer stands straight, no longer fights against gravity, but still bears life, still lives, still has leaves in this spring. His eyes were blue like the sea after a storm, clear and profound, deep blue, as if God had written with color, with that sort of depth, that sort of wisdom you only find in people who have lived long, very long, and seen much, seen too much, and survived it, understood it. Around his neck he wore a thin silk scarf, white, or what had become white after it faded, after the light left it, after time had touched it, and the sun, and the years. He wasn't really reading, not with concentration, not with effort, but kept glancing out the window, as if the words in his book and the landscape outside together formed one great poem, together told a story, a long story that only he could understand, that only he had spent a lifetime reading. I asked him carefully, respectfully, whether he was a clergyman, whether he belonged to a church, whether he worked somewhere, or whether he simply traveled. He laughed softly, not bitterly, not cynically, but with a laugh that sounded like water, like rain, like all gentle, pleasing things. A laugh like water in the desert. "No," he said, and his gaze was grateful, peaceful. "I'm a wandering preacher. That means I have no church, no walls, no stone, no parish, no place where you can find me, no salary, no monthly check, no security, no pension. The whole world is my church. Trains, like this one, railway stations, waiting rooms, park benches, bus shelters. Everywhere people are tired and sitting quietly. Everywhere people are lonely. There I preach. There I speak of grace. I'm not official. The church hasn't ordained me. The church doesn't know me. The church isn't interested in me. But I know the church. I know it everywhere, in every train, in every heart that's open." He told me, slowly, thoughtfully, as if sharing a secret, that for 50 years he'd been working on the same preaching theme, that his whole life long, 50 years, he'd held to the same message, that he'd never preached on anything else, never changed to another subject. Grace. Grace, grace, grace. Not theological grace, not that complicated thing from schools and disputations and academic debates, but everyday grace, invisible grace, the grace that carries you, that holds you, that saves you every day. The grace that the train offers you, saving you from rain, from cold, from loneliness, saving you from a cold platform, from the night, from despair. The grace that snow falls, for no reason, with no expectation, with no reward, and shows you how clean the world can be, how innocent, how fresh and new, as if everything were just being born. The grace that old people like me give you time, precious time, perhaps the last time, to listen, to see a face, to know you're not alone, that someone is there. "In 50 years, he said quietly, his voice barely audible now above the rattle of the train, and his gaze grew even more distant, even older, even deeper. Like looking into an old well and not seeing the bottom, I've kept coming back to this one sentence, like a child who hears a story and asks for it again and again. And I've never grown tired of it, never understood all of it. The world gives you more than you've ever deserved. That's not justice. Justice is too narrow, too thin, too much arithmetic. That's not compassion. Compassion is something you've earned if you've been good. That is grace. That is undeserved goodness, simply given. That is the generosity of the world, falling upon you like rain, not because you're worthy of it, but because the world is generous. Generous for no reason, generous without cause. "I've preached in churches," he said, and it sounded like a memory, a time that's past. Beautiful churches, old churches, churches with organs that sound like God himself. The stone warm from the prayers of hundreds of years, of thousands of years. People who prayed, hoped, wept, loved, but the people there, they already know they're saved, or they don't believe it, and my preaching doesn't change that, not really. My voice is one among many, lost in all the stone and the history. But here, he gestured to the windows, the Hesseland windows, the spring windows, at the young meadows, the buds, the fields turning green with new strength. Here are people who aren't sure, who doubt, who don't know. A businessman who's frightened of tomorrow, deeply frightened, of bankruptcy, of loss, of meaninglessness. A woman who's lost her son and no longer knows who she is, no longer knows why she lives. A child who doesn't know who it is, where it's going, what the future holds. A child frightened, like we all are. And I sit beside them, and I don't speak grand words, don't quote long passages from the Bible they won't understand, don't offer theological concepts. I simply say, quietly, gently, "Look out the window. The snow is falling, or the blossoms are falling, depending when we're traveling, depending what season it is. Nobody deserves snow, but we have it. The tree has no right to turn green, to bloom, to live, but it does turn green. That's grace. You there, don't deserve to live, haven't earned it, but you do live. That's everything. That's the only thing that really counts." The train accelerated, slowly, steadily, through the spring Hesseland, through meadows, through villages, through forests. The buds became real, not thought, but reality. Bloomed open, burst forth, showed their colors, red, orange, white, green. Life broke from the earth, green, unbidden, undeserved by the earth, unearned by the plants, but simply there, like a blessing, like a gift no one ordered, no one had earned. The wandering preacher looked down at his tattered Bible, the Bible that had been his whole life, that had been his traveling companion, that had been his truth. "My son, well, he's about your age, around 60, 70, once asked me years ago whether I wasn't tired of saying the same thing over and over, saying it in 100 different trains, to 100 different faces, to 100 different human hearts, year after year, decade after decade, always the same, always grace, always grace." And I said, and I still say it, "No, my son, not because the subject doesn't tire you, everything tires you, even truth tires you, but because grace never tires you. Grace is the only thing that grows softer with each repetition, not harder, not duller. Every time I say it, I understand it better. Every time a stranger, like you now, listens to me and a smile comes to their face, when their eyes grow soft, when the fear leaves, I receive this grace myself. I take it with me, and it carries me a little further, a little lighter, a little closer to God." As the train drew near Bad Hersfeld, we were almost there. The wandering preacher grew quiet, still, meditative, like a man who has lived his life, done his work, who is ready for what comes. His book lay on his lap, closed now, like a prayer that's finished, that's been said, that has reached God. The Bible, warm from his hand, warm from his soul. His hands were folded, not in tension, not in prayer, but naturally, as if cradling himself, as if comforting himself, as if all the love of the world were concentrated on one single person, and that person were himself. The train fell into its rhythm, clack, 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 and the buds rushed past, so tiny in this vast world, so insignificant in size, and yet all grace, all blessing, all the gift of what is given undeservedly, for no reason, without cause, without reward. And I thought of grace, of all the times I'd been given more than I'd deserved, when life gave to me, not because I was good, but because the world is generous. Of the train carrying me, bearing me away, bearing me home. Of the old man sitting beside me telling me of grace, who'd devoted his life to grace. Of the spring that comes, not because I ordered it, not because I deserved it, but simply there, just there. And my eyes grew heavy, 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 grateful heavy, gratefully tired, grateful for this grace. And I fell asleep with the certain knowledge, with the sacred, sure knowledge, that the world gives me more than I ever deserve, gives more than I ever need, and that's good, and that's enough, and that's everything, that's truly everything that I'll ever need.